My father was Dutch and my mother was English, and I was born in Batavia. They had met in Genoa in Italy and married there, and then they traveled to Indonesia because my father had a job with KPM, which is a Dutch shipping company, and they led a very nice colonial life there. And then a few years later, I was born, 1938, and it was Batavia in those days. It's called Jakarta now. 2 years later, my brother was born, Martin, and then when I was nearly 4 and he was nearly 3, we had the Japanese invade Indonesia. My father said to my mother, do go to Australia, it's the land of milk and honey. Nothing's going to happen there and you'll be safe. But she wouldn't leave his side. And actually the families who did leave, many of them lost their lives. Not many reached Australia because the Japanese torpedoed the boats, even though they were just women and children on them. And so many of their friends didn't survive that. We stayed on, and of course, without any fighting, the Indonesia was overrun. The Japanese came in and imprisoned us, women and children, and the men were taken off to war. I remember seeing my father going off and my uncle, and that was the last we saw of them for 3.5 years, nearly 4 years. So they were prisoners of war, working on the Burma Railway for the Japanese as laborers. There wasn't much food, and I sucked my thumb a lot, and my mother used to just let me, because when I was sucking my thumb, at least I was telling her how hungry I was. So it was an interesting time. And sometimes, we weren't allowed to cook the fires, no fires, so we just had to eat what we were given, which was really flour and water in the morning. That was like starch that you would starch shirt collars with in those days, and a few vegetables that the women grew that they picked in the fields, and that's what they did mainly all day, was work in the fields, and the children just ran about in the camp. And we used to actually steal the banana peels out of the dustbins, and they weren't allowed to cook fires, to light fires, but they would cook the banana peels and we would eat them, and the children would always be wandering around just in case a Japanese guard was around, because they would get into big trouble if they were caught. And there'd always be a word, like donuts, and the kids would just sing out donuts, donuts, and it'd all go around the camp, and the women who were secreting a fire somewhere would quickly douse it, turn it off. We would chew the banana peels raw, but have you tried it? It's very fibrous. When the Gurkhas came, from the little Nepalese warriors came to free us, they just trooped in, and the Japanese had disappeared. Everyone slunk off because they knew they'd lost the war there, and we were just freed. They walked in and we were freed. I chewed chewing gum for the first time when I was nearly 8. I actually had dysentery all the time, so my mother was always feeding me charcoal out of the fires, which probably saved my life. And then we were repatriated back to Holland on the Johan van Oldenbarneveld. It was a hospital ship during the war. And we were given lots of food that we'd never seen before. Like, I remember eating my first potato, my first rhubarb, etc., etc. And my mother would just say, just eat that much, that's all you must eat. And everyone else was overeating, and many of the children died. We threw many white coffins overboard, and when the first one went, my mother explained, that's because this child ate too much, and because we've been starving, we have to be careful. So that was quite a good lesson to learn. And then because we had nothing, we just had, you know, the clothes we stood up in more or less, and some that the Red Cross had given us, no winter clothes, being in the tropics. We stopped at a place called Aleppo there, and we were taken on land sort of barges onto there, and there were tables of clothing where you could choose a winter coat, a hat, and whatever there was. I can remember a ghastly maroon coat that I had, and just so that we wouldn't freeze when we got to Europe. And so we were just like refugees, really. Yep, so when the war ended, I was must have been 7.5. We went to school for 6 months in Bangkok. Then in Guernsey, we just had a holiday, meeting the family, and then we went to Holland. And I went to school for a year in Holland. And because we hadn't seen furniture, we always squat sequence comes from there. And we had never seen a chair or seen anything. So, and it was snowing, it was winter time in Holland, and we'd sit waiting for the bus, squatting like natives, you know. And I always used to have to make a hollow in the snow so my bottom wouldn't get wet, you know. So we'd always squat on the floor and waiting for a bus or a train or something, and people always say, oh, look at those strange kids. You know, took us a while to use furniture. And also, of course, we hadn't had shoes, so I didn't wear shoes until that visit in Aleppo, where we got some shoes for the first time. How uncomfortable when you haven't worn shoes until you're 8 years old. My father had the job of weighing pigs at farms. I don't quite know the details, but I remember going with him and hearing and feeling sorry for the pigs screaming. It was a strange thing for him to do because he was Jewish, and that's all he could do straight after the war. But then he got a job where he was employed by Royal Inter-Ocean Lines. He always looked after passengers, and that's when I was a bit of a tomboy, I guess. I was always playing cricket with the boys and the boys' side. In those days we were very much segregated, and there was always a loudspeaker, Nicky Cameling, please go back to the girls' side, etc., etc. But I did play a lot of sport. I played hockey and swam competitively for the school, and it was really good times, a very free time. My father came off the Burma Railway, and his first words that I remember were, life is for living, make the most of every minute. So we had a very good life. If there was a good circus, or if there was film, or if there was theatre, we went out to dinner with the family. We just made the most of every moment. It was really a good thing. My first husband was Jan Hans Peter Knoff, and it was always very amusing because in Dutch, knoflook means garlic. And so I always called him Knoff. When we went to Norway, it was a very funny thing for all the family because it was a very old-fashioned thing to do. In the olden days, the wife always called her husband by the surname, and it really means Mr. Knoff. You know, it was a very formal thing. But because it was such a funny name, that's how I called him when we were first friends before we got married, and it always stuck. And so when we got married, we then went for 4 years to Europe to travel all around Europe. I was on a Dutch passport, he on a Norwegian passport. It was a very good experience because I saw many countries and we lived in them for a while. I lived in Norway and learnt Norwegian and met all his family, as well as being able to ski from your kitchen door and just go all day out in the forest, see elk and woodpeckers that used to put on red feathered trousers, and mink running through the snow, white as white. It was quite amazing, just taking off, skiing all day and then coming back in at night. Bikram had a school in his apartment, really, and he taught like this. He didn't teach classes or class times. He was there from 5 in the morning until 11 at night, and you could go at any time to go and have a lesson. So if you chose your time wisely, you would be there on your own and have a private lesson, or you could be there and there might be 6 other people in the class, even up to 10 perhaps. I always managed to get there pretty well privately whenever I could. And there were a lot of American people in Tokyo, and in the end they sort of encouraged him to come back to Hawaii and set up a school there. And that's when he started having the hot yoga. The hot rooms was really the Americans' idea, not Bikram Choudhury's. Then from there he went to Los Angeles, and he had a big school there in Beverly Hills, which is probably still running. I really got into yoga straight away. I was digging my heels going to Bikram's, but he taught in such a way and was so dynamic that when you booked in there, he wanted you to come every day, 6 days a week for 3 months, which is a good idea because then you stay with it, you know, because you feel the benefit. It's different from going once a week. And then after 3 months, he says, well, you could practice, you know, 3 days at home and come here for 3 days, so 6 days a week. And then if you mightn't practice one day, he'd say, so which day did you not practice when you came for your next practice? Because he could tell that you hadn't done your practice. So you were really encouraged to do home practice, and you really got deeply into it. Well, after that, although my husband was hoping it was a passing fad, I was really very interested. I read lots of books about yoga, all the philosophy, and really studied it very deeply. Not with the idea ever of becoming a teacher. I was never going to teach yoga. I was just interested in it to practice it. Years later, actually 5 years later, after Bikram had left Tokyo, he was in Hollywood, and I came to America, and I thought, oh, I'll drop in and see Bikram. And there he was in Hollywood, on the Hollywood Boulevard, being massaged by a lady, sequenced, false eyelashes, beautiful Hollywood people in the class, probably about 40 people in the class. And I thought, oh, he probably won't remember me. We hadn't kept in touch at all. But as soon as I walked in, he said, hi, Nicky, can you wait till the end of class? I'd love to talk to you. because when I was in Japan, he was having visa problems and sometimes asked me to come and just teach the next few people for a few hours to give him a few hours break. But I said to him, I'm not a teacher, I'm only a learner, I don't want to teach. But when he started me off on that, I realized how interesting it was to get other people into the poses. It was much more depth to it than just working it out for myself. So he started off my interest. But even when I left there, I wasn't going to teach. So I've always sort of resisted teaching yoga in a way. How I got into working with therapy was one day they phoned me. Three physiotherapists were there at the hospital working with a young girl, Maori girl, who had had a stroke at 19, Sandy. They were working with her full on. She was only 19, but they were breaking up for Christmas for 3 weeks, and they said, Nicky, come and show us what you would do with this Sandy in yoga. Perhaps she could come to your yoga. So we did privates together for 3 weeks over Christmas time, and she had her hand in a sling and was using a cane. And very soon doing yoga, she was a very keen student. She could throw away the sling and the cane and made big strides, progress. And then Sandy went to the Crippled Children's Centre to apply for a disabled car that she could drive manually. And they said, what happened to you? They were so surprised she was without her cane. She said, I've been doing yoga without her sling. I've been doing yoga. And so they said, well, bring your yoga teacher to us. We want to do yoga too. And then she said to me, there are about 30 of them there. They want to meet you. And I thought, my goodness, what can I do with 30 people? One-on-one is hard work. Anyway, so in my classes and all my yoga friends, I said to them, I'm going to the Crippled Children's Centre. That's what it was called in those days. And please come with me and keep me company and show them what we need to do with them. In Auckland, one of the people who came to help me and who was always there was James Bryan. Yes, he was very keen and always helped me with the people, very reliable. He had a wife and had problems because he got more and more interested in yoga, decided to go to the naturopathic college and do naturopathy. And his wife was very distressed because he was an accountant with a 3-piece suit and a company car, and he had to just give all that up. She was interested in having her house paid off and having lots of beautiful things, so she was very distressed by James's change of heart, because I had the same sort of situation in my house. My husband was full-on businessman and very disinterested in yoga. In fact, even was against yoga, so I never spoke to it about it at home. In 1970, I was interested in yoga, but it took me until 1987 to be able to go to study with Iyengar in Pune, where I had been wanting to go because my husband didn't approve of it. And so it was a very difficult thing. But when I finally went, it really meant the end of our marriage because he just was determined that I wasn't to come back. I went to India and James was there, and he was very amazed at how, he said, I can't believe how at home you are here and how happy. Well, I just also was free to practice yoga and learn from Iyengar. And it was something I had really waited for many years. We were allowed to come and practice. At times we practiced our own practice. And then it was always scary because Iyengar and Gita would come and practice, Prashant too would come and practice too. And often Iyengar would come and be right next to you, which is very uncomfortable because you didn't want to disturb him. And one time I was using, it's a plank with an end to it, and you use it for Viparita Dandasana, and you stand it on your head and bring your feet over, and then you use that plank to have leverage so you can get into a bigger back bend, a stronger back bend. And so I used it, and he just threw me off the plank and said, "This is for beginners, and what are you doing using this equipment?" And I said, "Oh, sir, I'm here to learn, you know." And you really feel you've spoilt his practice, as he's a bit of a wild man. And one day he just swung a rope and hit James in the testicles, that sort of thing. And one day he came in with he had pink silky shorts, and they were on back to front, and the back pocket was in the front. But he came to give us a lecture for half an hour on perfection and being conscious. And I kept whispering to James, "Please, sir, why are your shorts on back to front?" And I felt such an urge, a naughty urge, to ask him that after he'd finished all this spiel about perfection. "Please, sir, why are your shorts on back to front?" But I didn't want to be thrown out of the institute just then, so I just left it, and we were very amused by that. And we were working from at the back of Iyengar's book, and the third course, some of the, if you follow the asana practice correctly and follow the timings and everything, can take 8 hours in a day. So we were often practicing full on all day. And we were finding that we weren't strong enough to do the bird postures because Iyengar had decided not to do vinyasa, not to do sun salutations. So we found that we weren't strong enough, and we came across a magazine that had an article about Pattabhi Jois, and we had never heard about him. And so that was 89. We heard about him, we read that article probably in November or December, and by January we were in Mysore going to Pattabhi Jois's classes to learn the Ashtanga, to learn the Vinyasa, and to learn the sun salutation and his way of teaching, which was exactly as Krishnamacharya had taught. It was well worth it because we learnt a lot and had a lot of experiences and were able to study with Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois. Years later, when we were in Colorado, we also studied with Desikachar, and he is they all learnt from Desikachar's father, Krishnamacharya, but they have a completely different approach, each one of them, and it's very interesting. So I was there with Martin and Jim Wallace and James Bryan, and we walked on the Annapurna circuit. And that was very difficult to practice yoga there because the ground is very uneven, and it's just often about survival. You know, you were cold, you were hungry, took 2 hours to get a meal cooked on the little fire in the house without a chimney, smoke everywhere, and the people were so smoked that you could scrape their skin. And of course, we always wanted to have a bath every day. There weren't any showers or anything. So we used to go down to the river, and all the Nepalese used to come to the bridge to watch us. They thought we were crazy bathing because you didn't bathe during the winter. They watched us. We'd take our balaclavas off, wash our faces and hair, and bit by bit get all washed through our body in the icy cold river. So it was a funny time, and trying to practice yoga at the same time. Of course, meditation and pranayama was fine, plenty of fresh air, but that was quite an adventure we did. And James, although he told me he liked my brother better than he liked me, could get on with him much better than with me, in the end, we got together. Yes. We left to go to Colorado in 2000 and set up a school in Grand Junction, Colorado. And we were teaching Ashtanga then with Iyengar alignment. And that was the start, really, of combining the two to have a yoga that was working, that works. And is maintainable by everyone. But we were teaching ski instructors, snowboard instructors, people who were mountain bike riders, super athletes, most of them in Colorado. And they came to us and they said, we don't want to do this full-on yoga, we just want to do enough so that we can improve in our sport and use it as a tool to lead a better life. So that's when we started thinking about the postures, and we actually wrote all the postures down on cards, and then gave them a number that which is what Iyengar's done too, but often the ones that he finds he gives a hard mark to, we think is not as hard, and we're not quite in agreement with them all. Who are we to question the guru? But that's how it seemed in our practice. And then we spent years thinking about it, and gradually, it's still a process, because we're developing a system, because we feel so often we went to classes and there was, it was random yoga, what should we do today? And you would work a full class on sideways splits, for instance, and it leaves you feeling quite different from when you work a holistic program and you do inversions, warming postures, inversions, and then sitting postures, and you do some from each section of it, ending in back bends and cool downs, and then go into pranayama and meditation. It makes much more sense. And just as we have a syllabus to go from kindergarten to university, we should be able to progress in yoga that way too. And when you teach it randomly, if you teach it so that the postures you learn in discovery prepare you for the postures in foundation, prepare you for the postures in intermediate, prepare you for the postures in advanced and masters, then there's a methodical way of opening up the body. And sometimes you can go ahead and learn a more difficult posture, and then go back to basics, and somehow you understand something and you're able to do the more advanced posture. So it's sort of like a spiral staircase, how you go up and up, right until you're doing the postures in masters. And I've been doing this for 44 years, and we've only probably had about 6, 7 people go through to masters in all that time.